How cold does a night have to become before a human heart decides it will either harden or break forever? The winter wind in Iron Creek seemed intent on forcing Evelyn Hart to answer that question, tearing through the New Year garlands still hanging from balconies, rattling tin roofs, and cutting against her cheeks until they burned. Snow gathered along the muddy street like old regrets, trampled and stained, and in the middle of it all she stood alone with her carpetbag, breath shaking in the air, as the boarding house door slammed shut behind her. Mrs. Gable had not simply evicted her, she had done it loudly, cruelly, as if humiliation were part of the rent Evelyn had failed to pay. 3 weeks overdue. 3 weeks too long. That was enough to push her out into the street. People watched without blinking. A few whispered. Others simply stared, their faces worn by work and warmed by the whiskey they would drink later to welcome the new year. Not one hand reached out. She heard the word saloon muttered more than once, spoken with the easy certainty of people who assumed women always fell the same way once they lost their footing. Evelyn's fingers tightened on the handle of her bag. She would starve first. She would freeze first. Her father had raised her with principles that felt foolish now, but still, they rooted her to herself. The only sound louder than the wind was the frantic beat of her heart. The sheriff passed by and didn't even slow his horse. Somewhere a piano banged drunken chords in celebration of beginnings she would not see. A child pointed. A woman turned the child's face away. Shame wrapped tighter than the cold, and yet, even then she straightened her back. She would not beg. But what did pride matter when the night promised to swallow her? She had nowhere to go, nowhere safe. The snow kept falling. And then the murmurs shifted. Heads turned as if a shadow had slid across the sun, though there was no sun now, only gray. A massive black horse emerged from the drifting veil of white, steam curling at its nostrils like smoke from Hell's Gate. The man on its back sat straight and silent, long coat dusted with ice, jaw set beneath a rough beard. Cole Mercer. The name moved through the street like a rumor-given breath. Some feared him. Others simply refused to say his name aloud. He was the man who lived above the timberline, where storms forgot to end. A hunter. A ghost. Or both. The crowd parted on instinct. Cole's gaze swept across them once, then settled on Evelyn with unblinking clarity, as if he knew already what story had led her to this moment. He swung down from the saddle with calm, unhurried precision, boots hitting the ground like the closing of a heavy door. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Only the wind did. "You'll die out here," he said at last, his voice a low, steady weight. Not cruel, not kind, just true. Evelyn swallowed. "I know." The words tasted like surrender and yet also like defiance. She would not dress them in excuses. Cole studied her the way a man evaluates weather, deciding whether it will break him or pass. Then he gave her the choice that would change everything. "Work for me. On the mountain, fire to tend, meals to keep, skins to cure. You work, you eat. You don't work, you don't. I don't offer charity." He paused. "And I don't lie." For a flicker of a second, Evelyn thought she might laugh because the offer sounded like madness. Go with a stranger known more for violence than mercy? Leave the last shred of civilization she still clung to? But the alternative was the cold, the dark, the saloon, the slow, inevitable erosion of her soul. She looked at the townspeople again. No one stepped forward. No one said her name. And she understood, clearly, painfully, that Iron Creek had already decided she did not belong. Her father was gone. Her money gone. Her home gone. All she had left was the part of herself that refused to break. She turned back to Cole. "What do you want from me besides work?" Her voice was quiet but steady. She was not naive. Not anymore. His eyes did not change. "Work is enough." Silence stretched. The New Year lanterns clinked softly in the wind, like fragile hopes barely holding, and Evelyn Hart nodded. It was not acceptance. It was resolve. Cole lifted her bag without ceremony and handed her his gloved hand to help her mount behind him on the black horse. When she hesitated, he said nothing, only waited, patient as stone. Then she climbed up, heart hammering, fingers gripping the worn leather saddle. No one called goodbye. No one wished her luck. As the horse turned toward the snow-choked road that wound into the mountains, Iron Creek blurred behind them, its lights flickering like distant stars fading out one by one. Evelyn did not look back. She could not. She did not yet know about the ledger hidden in her belongings, or about the blood and fire that connected her fate to his. She did not yet know how deeply the secrets beneath the snow would cut. All she knew was that the night was cold, the future uncertain, and the man before her seemed carved from the same hard truth as the mountain itself. And sometimes, when the world closes every door, a person chooses the one path that terrifies them most, simply because it is still a path. The wind howled, the horse climbed, and the year turned. Evelyn Hart rode toward the unknown, carrying broken hope, buried grief, and a quiet, stubborn yearning for something beyond survival. Even if she dared not name it yet. The mountains did not welcome strangers. They tolerated them, the way a wounded animal tolerates the hand that feeds it, warily, always ready to bite. Evelyn Hart learned this in the first week on Wolf Ridge, where the sky felt closer than people ever had, and silence carried more weight than any spoken word. The cabin stood alone against the white world, its rough timbers darkened by storms and age, smoke threading from the chimney like a thin, stubborn lifeline. Each morning the cold reached inside her bones before she had even opened her eyes. She woke to ash, to the faint hiss of the dying fire, to Cole Mercer moving quietly through the single room with the practiced stillness of a man used to solitude. He never asked if she was warm enough. He simply placed another log on the coals before dawn, as if the fire were an agreement neither of them would mention but both would honor. Life settled into rhythm. She cleaned pelts, learning the sharp, practical movements until her hands burned. She chopped ice to melt water, the blade ringing through the frozen quiet like a bell. She cooked simple meals, beans, rabbit stew, cornbread dense as the snowdrifts outside. Each task drew blood or tears in the beginning. Each task became easier, slowly, painfully. At night, when the storms screamed through the pines, Evelyn sometimes pressed her palm against the cabin wall and felt the mountain breathing around them. It was vast, indifferent, and yet, in that indifferent world, Cole saw her, not always with words, rarely with softness, but he saw her. He corrected her grip on a knife with a light touch, then stepped back before it became more than instruction. When she slipped in the snow, he reached for her elbow, steady but impersonal, as if reminding himself not to hold on longer than necessary. He spoke little during the day, but each sentence meant something. Winds shifting, expect trouble. You're pushing too hard. Rest or you'll break. Good work. Those two words carried more warmth than any fire. Evelyn did not ask him for comfort, but she listened, and she began slowly to understand the language of silence. The cabin walls held stories neither of them yet told. She felt them like ghosts that chose to wait their turn. When she lay awake at night, she sometimes heard Cole's breathing catch with dreams that were closer to nightmares. He never spoke of them in the morning. He simply sharpened his knife and faced the day again. Trust forms strangely between two people who have no one else. It grows in glances, in small acts, in the quiet ways they begin to rely on each other without realizing it. The ledger remained hidden among her belongings, wrapped in cloth, heavy with truth. She avoided it, the way one avoids pressing on a wound. Still, she felt it there, shaping her choices, reminding her that Wolf Ridge was a refuge, not a destination. Freedom was not simply survival. Freedom meant justice, and justice meant facing the man who had destroyed both of their lives. Sometimes, when Cole returned from checking traps at twilight, snow in his beard, she caught him watching her in the low firelight. Not possessive, not hungry. simply curious, as if he were trying to remember what it meant to exist beside another human being, as if being near her was both a risk and a relief. "You're stronger than you think," he said once, almost reluctantly. Evelyn swallowed the emotion that rose too quickly. "That's because you don't let me be weak." He didn't answer, but his eyes softened, just for a moment. The mountain tested them daily. A storm rolled in without warning, burying the trail and bending trees under white weight. The wind howled like grief. The cabin shuddered. They worked side by side through the night, feeding the fire, securing supplies, making sure the roof would hold. When at last exhaustion forced them to lie down, the cold was relentless. Without comment, Cole lifted the blanket and shifted closer, sharing warmth the way people do when survival depends on it. It was not passion, it was not innocence, it was something deeper, the simple fact that they were no longer alone. Evelyn felt his heartbeat through the quiet, strong and steady. He said nothing, neither did she, but something changed after that. A wall shifted, a line blurred, and yet the past never loosened its grip. Once, she found him standing outside at sunrise, staring down toward Iron Creek as smoke rose faint and distant. His jaw was tight, his hands were fists. She didn't ask. Later, he told her more. About Mary, about the fire, about Graham Blackwell's men laughing in the distance while everything he loved burned. His voice never wavered, but his eyes did. Evelyn listened with the reverence one gives to sacred things. Then she told him about her father, Thomas Hart, whose brilliant mind had found water where no one thought it could exist. How Graham stole it. How he silenced every protest with money or bullets. How her father never came home. The ledger became more than paper. It became a promise, a way forward, a weapon of truth. The new year faded into memory as winter loosened its hold. Snow thinned into hard, glittering crust. Sunlight lasted longer along the ridges, touching the world like forgiveness. With spring came decision. They could not hide up here forever. They would go down the mountain, together. And with each passing day, the fragile, unspoken bond between them deepened. Not in grand gestures, not in declarations, but in small things. The way Cole handed her coffee first. The way Evelyn set aside the last piece of bread for him without thinking. The way silence began to feel less like loneliness and more like peace. Still, beneath that peace lay something darker, something restless. Because love, when it grows in places where everything else has been taken, does not simply heal. It sharpens. It gives meaning to the fight. And both of them knew, whether they said it or not, that their fight was coming. The mountain had prepared them for it. Snow lingered in the creases of the mountains even as spring crept forward, stubborn and pale, like grief that refuses to melt. Life on Wolf Ridge continued in disciplined silence, but underneath that rhythm something deeper began to surface. Truth, long buried and aching, pressing upward like thawing earth. Evelyn Hart had grown used to the quiet between herself and Cole Mercer, but lately that quiet felt fuller, heavier, threaded with questions they were no longer able to outrun. The night it finally broke open began without warning. A late storm had swept through and left the world sharpened and clear, the sky black and vast above them. They sat across from one another at the table, a single lantern burning between them, its light flickering like a heartbeat. Cole's hands were still marked with the day's work, rope burns, small cuts, cold roughened skin. He had been watching the fire, but now his gaze shifted to her, steady and troubled. "You said once," he began slowly, "that Iron Creek wasn't the first place you had to leave." Evelyn held the edge of her cup, feeling the metal cool beneath her fingertips. The memory rose before she could stop it. "No," she whispered. "It wasn't." She told him then, about her father, Thomas Hart, whose mind had been sharp enough to bring water out of unforgiving ground, whose work should have saved families instead of destroying them. How Graham Blackwell arrived smiling, generous on the surface, promising investment and progress while quietly rewriting deeds and forcing signatures from trembling hands. How the protests disappeared. How the people who spoke too loudly seemed to stop existing. And finally, how her father went out one morning and did not come back. The sheriff called it robbery. The town called it tragedy. Evelyn called it murder. Cole did not interrupt. His eyes stayed fixed on her, unwavering, like a man forcing himself to look at a wound he already knows the shape of. When she finished, the cabin felt smaller, more fragile. "You kept something," he said quietly. Not a question. Evelyn nodded. She rose, crossed to her trunk, and lifted out the cloth-wrapped ledger. Placing it on the table was like setting down a living thing. The leather cover was worn, the edges softened by time and grief. "My father wrote everything," she said, voice steady but tight. "Dates, contracts, names, payoffs, threats. Every lie Blackwell ever told dressed up his business." Cole reached out and touched the cover with the caution of a man handling a loaded weapon. "This could bury him. Or bury me," she replied, "depending on who gets to it first." Silence gathered around them, not empty but electric. For a moment, Evelyn feared she had shown him too much, trusted him too deeply. But Cole only sat back, the lantern's glow carving shadows beneath his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice carried something raw she had never heard from him before. "Mary used to keep a journal." Her name entered the room like a ghost that had always been there. Evelyn waited. The mountain itself seemed to listen. "She wrote everything too," he continued. "Plans, dreams, fights we had, things she loved, things she feared. One night she wrote about a man who came to the door with a polite voice and a hollow smile. He said our land would soon belong to Blackwell, that it would be easier on us if we agreed." His jaw tightened. I told him to leave. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a long, low sigh. Cole's voice roughened slightly. "A month later I was out hunting. The smoke rose before I saw the flames. They said later it was an accident, a lantern. But lanterns don't spread like that. Lanterns don't laugh." He swallowed the memory whole, but it still burned. Mary was inside. Evelyn felt the pain as if it were her own. She whispered, "I'm so sorry." He gave a faint nod, accepting the words not as sympathy but as truth. "I tracked the men responsible," he said. "Blackwell's men. I stopped them from hurting anyone else. But the man who gave the order..." His eyes hardened into winter stone. "He sits behind polished desks and calls himself Progress." The ledger lay between them like a bridge, or a fuse. They both understood now, fully, completely, that their lives had been torn apart by the same hand. Not fate, not misfortune. One man, Graham Blackwell. And this book could finally expose him, but it would cost them everything safe, everything quiet. "If we take this to the marshal in Durango," Evelyn said, "there will be no turning back." Cole's gaze didn't falter. There wasn't any turning back the day he took Mary from me. She felt the same truth echo in her chest for her father. Something shifted then, not loud, not dramatic, just a calm, fierce alignment of purpose. Two people who had been surviving began, instead, to prepare to fight. Trust, once fragile, became iron. They trained because the world beyond the ridge would not welcome their return. Cole taught her to fire a rifle with patience and respect, never pushing, never mocking. "Breathe with it," he said softly, adjusting her stance. "Don't fight the shot, let it happen." She learned, quickly, not because she craved violence, but because she refused to ever be helpless again. They planned their descent carefully. Supplies, routes, timing, risks. Wolf Ridge watched them, ancient and indifferent, as if it had seen countless lives break and mend across centuries. At night, when the lantern burned low, Evelyn sometimes wondered whether she deserved the fragile warmth she felt when Cole brushed her hand or met her gaze a second too long. Love, in a place like this, felt almost dangerous. but it also felt inevitable. Not born of desperation, but of shared wounds and the long, patient work of simply staying beside one another. Still, beneath the quiet hope, a darker awareness pulsed. Blackwell did not forgive. Blackwell did not forget. And the ledger in Evelyn's hands was not only proof, it was a threat. One that could draw blood. One that already had. As the last snows softened and the rivers began to run again, Evelyn stood outside the cabin and watched sunlight spill across the ridges. For the first time in years, the future did not look empty. It looked terrifying. And necessary. She pressed the ledger to her chest and closed her eyes. Justice was waiting below. So was danger, and they would face both together. Spring loosened winter's grip with a quiet, determined patience, as if the mountain itself were slowly exhaling. Ice thinned along the edges of the river, snow retreated into shadows, and the trail down from Wolf Ridge revealed itself like a promise. For Evelyn Hart and Cole Mercer, that promise was sharpened with purpose. They packed carefully, each movement deliberate, each decision weighed. The ledger rested inside Evelyn's satchel, wrapped in cloth, close enough to feel like a heartbeat against her side. They spoke little the morning they left. There was nothing left to ask, and nothing left to doubt. The mountain had given them shelter. Now it would release them back to the world that had once broken them. Cole rode ahead, scanning the trail with the wary precision of a man who trusted very little beyond what he could see. Evelyn followed close, hands steady on the reins, feeling the strange ache of leaving behind a place that had both wounded and healed her. The air tasted different as they descended, warmer, more alive, carrying the distant echo of voices, work, and lawless order. Civilization, such as it was. By the time they reached the outskirts of Silverton, clouds had gathered low and sullen, pressing the gray sky down toward the rooftops. Cole suggested they make the exchange quickly. Meet the federal marshal, hand over the ledger, and disappear before Blackwell caught scent of them. Evelyn agreed. It should have been simple, but nothing involving Graham Blackwell ever was. The moment they entered town, something felt wrong. The streets were too quiet. The faces that glanced their way disappeared too quickly. Cole dismounted slowly, muscles tightening beneath his coat. "Stay close," he murmured. She did. They walked toward the meeting point near the trading post, a place chosen for neutrality, for safety. Except safety did not exist anymore. Sheriff Wallace Brody stepped from the shadows like a stain that refused to wash out, his badge glinting dully beneath the lowering sky. Behind him stood Blackwell's men, 3, 4, then more, rifles ready, expressions cold. Evelyn's breath froze in her chest. Cole edged subtly in front of her. "Afternoon," Brody said, smiling with a politeness that reeked of rot. "Seems you folks wandered into the wrong town with the wrong book." Cole's hand hovered near his holster. "We have business with the marshal." "Do you?" Brody's smile widened. Funny thing, he never showed. And then, like thunder breaking loose, the first shot rang out. Cole moved instantly, shoving Evelyn behind a stone pillar as gunfire exploded through the street. Wood shattered, glass screamed, horses bolted. Evelyn clutched the satchel to her chest and tried not to panic. Cole returned fire with calm, lethal precision. Each shot measured, but there were too many. A bullet tore into his thigh, the impact wrenching him back against the wall. His jaw clenched, breath ragged, but he did not fall. "Run," he hissed. "No!" She reached for him. He pushed her back, eyes fierce. "Run, Evelyn!" But there was nowhere to go. Rough hands seized her arms, yanking her into the open. The satchel slipped. Brody caught it before it hit the ground, triumphant. "There it is," he said softly. "The little book that causes so much trouble." Cole surged forward despite the blood streaming down his leg. 2 men slammed rifle butts into him, dropping him to his knees. He still tried to stand, still tried to reach her. Evelyn screamed his name, but the sound disappeared under the roar of chaos, and then the world went dark. When she woke, The room was unfamiliar. Too soft, too scented, too false. A hotel suite, draped in expensive cloth and quiet cruelty. Graham Blackwell stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back, admiring the town below as if it were a painting he owned. "Miss Hart," he said pleasantly without turning, "you have something that belongs to me." Evelyn forced herself upright. "It was never yours." He turned then, smiling with the empty warmth of a man who has forgotten how to mean anything. "Everything here is mine. Water, land, law, people." He gestured lazily. "Even your hunter friend, though he is significantly less useful in his current condition." Fear flickered through her, but it hardened quickly into fury. "You killed my father." He tilted his head. "He was inconvenient." Her voice steadied. "And Mary Mercer?" A pause. A shadow crossed his smile. Then it returned. "Collateral." Evelyn's hands trembled, not with fear now, but with rage so deep it felt rooted in her bones. "You will answer for this." "No," he said gently. "You will." He lifted the ledger. He must have taken it from Brody. He flipped through the pages with bored amusement. A tragic little diary of grievances, easily destroyed. Her breath caught. "You burn that book," she whispered, "and you burn the truth." "Truth," he repeated, tasting the word like a foreign spice. "Truth is what people agree to believe, and they believe me." He nodded to the guards. "Lock her up. We'll handle the rest at the New Year ceremony." They dragged her away. The door closed like a final sentence. Somewhere far from that gilded prison, Cole Mercer woke alone. Pain flared through his leg with every breath, but survival burned hotter. He bound the wound as best he could, found a crutch, and forced himself upright. Each step was a promise, not of victory, not of safety. A promise that he would not leave Evelyn to face the darkness alone. He saddled his horse with fumbling hands, blood staining the leather. The world swayed. He held on. Then he rode, half-conscious, relentless, toward Iron Creek, toward Blackwell, toward reckoning. Back in the hotel, Evelyn stared at the ceiling, fear coiling quietly beneath her ribs. But she did not break. She waited. She planned. She prayed not to God, but to the mountain that had remade her, because she knew with a certainty that steadied her heart. Cole was coming, and so was the truth. Iron Creek had dressed itself in false celebration. New Year bunting still fluttered from balconies, and lanterns swayed over the main street like drifting stars. But the light felt wrong, thin, uneasy, because beneath the music, beneath the staged speeches and smiling lies, everyone sensed trouble brewing like thunder behind a closed door. Graham Blackwell had chosen this day for triumph. The timing was perfect. Appear generous, announce a new era, burn the ledger publicly, and erase every trace of what he had done. He stood on the hotel balcony in a tailored coat, voice lifting across the crowd with polished warmth. "Friends," he said, "everything I do for you." The lie slid smoothly over the people gathered below. Miners with tired eyes, mothers holding children, business owners who owed him too much to protest. And there, bound but upright, stood Evelyn Hart. She had refused to bow her head, refused to look small, refused to be silent. A guard kept a hand on her arm, but she did not flinch. Her breath steadied. Her eyes swept the crowd, searching for Cole. He wasn't there. Fear twisted for a moment, sharp and deep. But she held on. She had come too far to yield now. Blackwell lifted the ledger as if it were nothing more than a household nuisance. "This book," he announced, "has caused confusion, rumors, pain, so let us end all that tonight, peacefully." Sheriff Wallace Brody shifted uncomfortably nearby. Some of the townsfolk frowned. Others whispered. Evelyn took one step forward, voice cutting clean through the air. "It isn't confusion," she said. "It's truth." The murmur that followed was different now, sharper, alive. Blackwell paused, still smiling, but there was strain beneath it. Miss Hart has suffered. We understand grief makes people. My father was murdered, Evelyn said louder. Your men were seen leaving the road where his body was found. Silence rippled outward like cold water spreading across ice. One of the miners looked up sharply. Another crossed himself. Evelyn went on, her voice steady, her hands no longer trembling. You burned Mary Mercer alive in her own home because coal wouldn't sell. You paid off officials. You bought the water rights that kept this town breathing, and you did it with blood. Blackwell's smile cracked. Enough. No, Evelyn said quietly. Not anymore. Something shifted in the crowd. Doubt, memory, anger. Men and women began to speak softly to one another, old stories resurfacing, unease hardening into recognition. On the edge of the street, a lone rider appeared. A black horse, a man leaning heavily on the saddle horn. Blood darkened his trousers, his hat brim shadowed his eyes. Cole Mercer rode into Iron Creek like a ghost refusing to rest. The crowd turned. A hush fell. Blackwell's men reached for rifles, but they hesitated, because the townspeople were watching now with new eyes, no longer passive, no longer afraid in the same way. Cole dismounted slowly, jaw tight with pain, but his gaze never left Evelyn. In that brief moment, their eyes found each other through the noise and the color and the fear, and something in both of them steadied. They had not survived all this only to break apart now. Sheriff Brody swallowed. Blackwell, maybe we should... Hold your ground, Blackwell snapped, the polished mask now gone. He's just one man. Cole's voice cut across the space. One man who doesn't run. The tension snapped like dry timber, but instead of gunfire, it was the people who moved first. A miner stepped forward, then another, then half a dozen. The crowd shifted, bodies positioning themselves subtly between Blackwell's riflemen and their intended targets. Courage, once sparked, traveled fast. Evelyn saw it take root and grow. She raised her voice again. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just clear, unshaken. This ledger is proof. Names, dates, payments, threats. He's been stealing from this town for years. And when people stood up to him, she looked straight at Blackwell. They died. Brody's Adam's apple bobbed. Sweat slid down his neck. Is that true? Someone shouted. You lied about the fire, another cried. The fragile illusion Blackwell had lived inside began to break apart in real time. He tried to reassert control, voice turning sharp. Anyone who sides with them will regret it. But the threat fell flat, because the people were no longer listening as subjects. They were listening as witnesses. One of Blackwell's own men lowered his rifle first. Another followed. Even Brody sagged, badge suddenly heavy on his chest. I didn't sign up for this, he muttered, stepping aside. Panic flickered in Blackwell's eyes for the first time. He lunged toward the ledger, but Evelyn was faster. She held it high, voice ringing strong. This doesn't belong to you anymore. This belongs to the law, to the truth. And then Cole spoke, quieter but no less powerful. It belongs to every life you ruined. The marshal finally arrived, late, breathless, but armed with authority that now found ready support. He took the ledger from Evelyn's hands with reverence. We'll see justice done, he said, and this time the words did not feel like another lie. Blackwell tried to run. Before he could escape, the very people he had exploited closed in. No one touched him with violence. They simply did not let him pass. For a man like him, the loss of control was its own cage. Finally, the cuffs closed. The crowd exhaled, not triumphant, but relieved, as if a long, silent suffocation had ended. Cole swayed then, strength draining now that the fight was finished. Evelyn reached him in time to keep him from falling. His body was heavy against her, breath shallow, blood still warm and frighteningly real. You came back, she whispered. I told you, he murmured, voice thin but steady. I don't leave you to face darkness alone. The doctor pushed through, urgent but calm, guiding them indoors. While the town buzzed with shock and awakening hope, Evelyn stayed beside Cole every hour that followed. The fever came. It frightened her, but it broke. Slowly, painfully, he healed. While outside, Iron Creek began to repair its own fractured spirit. Weeks passed, then months. And when Cole could stand without pain, they married quietly in the small white church on the hill. Just voices, vows, and a town now learning what it meant to be free. Later, they returned to Wolf Ridge. Not to hide, not to escape, but to build something that felt honest and earned. A refuge with open doors and warm firelight for those left out in the cold. The mountains still held their storms. Life still held its shadows. But Evelyn and Cole faced them together now, not as survivors of separate tragedies, but as partners bound by truth, by love that had grown not from illusion, but from fire and winter and the courage to begin again. And though the past would always whisper, the future spoke louder. The world quiets near the end of a story, as if even the wind understands the heart needs space to rest. So now, let us slow our voices, soften each word, and let the images drift gently away like lanterns set afloat on a dark river. Evelyn Hart and Cole Mercer walked through fire, through winter, through loss that once felt permanent. Yet from that darkness, something new was born. Not a perfect life, not a fairy tale, but a steady one. A kind one. A life where pain was not erased, only carried more gently between two people strong enough to share the weight. The town changed, too. Iron Creek began to remember its dignity, its courage, its belonging to the people who worked its earth and raised their children under its sky. Justice did not fix everything, but it opened the door to healing. And somewhere on Wolf Ridge, a cabin glowed at night, warm against the cold. A quiet promise that love can survive even where the world once tried to erase it. Let that be the final picture we hold. A soft light, a slow breath, a whisper of hope that lingers after the last word fades. End of article. Good night, and of